Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of Bank on Digital. I'm so glad to have you all here, and I hope you'll be active as the audience we had in the last episode. We had a lot of questions, and I hope we answered them all. Today's a special episode because we're talking about open banking, a concept that's been really popular recently. It's been around for quite a few years, as some of you might not know. But still, there's a lot of potential in this concept for banks and fintechs. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about customer experience. And we'll talk about all of those things with a guest that I feel like is one of the best people to talk to about this topic, Meaghan Johnson. And she's someone I recently met. I mean, met, I would say. And I'm so happy that it's her because she's so passionate about this topic. I've read a lot of her articles, heard all of those talks that she gave on that are online, and I assure you it's going to be a really fun episode. So, Meaghan, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here today. And I'm looking forward to talking about all things customer experience, open banking, and hopefully answering a lot of questions.
Yeah, and you started this conversation really early, and you created something called digital mags. What is that? Because you told me you would explain this to me, and I just want to know more about it.
So, Digital Mags is my consulting business. The name actually came about back in 2016. So when I co-founded 11FS, I wasn't on Twitter I was active on LinkedIn, but not on Twitter or anything. And I was advised that I should develop a Twitter presence. And sometimes I'm very creative, but other times I'm not so creative. So I was talking to a good friend of mine, Luca, who at the time was co-founding Penta, a business bank for businesses in Germany. And so we were kind of brainstorming some names, and he said, "What about digital mags?" And it just kind of stuck, and we said, okay. And then we couldn't find digital mags with one S, so we went with two S's at the end, and it's kind of stuck with me for the past 8 years. So this is where digital mags came from.
Yeah, and you created the brand out of it, so
Yeah,
good job. And
thank you.
thank you, Luca, right? So where does your passion for fintech come from? Like, how did you enter this industry? Because it's not so inclusive, right?
Yeah. So I think like everything kind of good in life, it happened by complete chance and almost by accident. So after I finished uni, I moved to London. This was 2008, no, sorry, 2010, which was probably the worst time for a graduate to look for a job because we were kind of post financial crisis. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I had finished a master's in international development, so nothing to do with fintech or finance. And I was approached by a company that needed an American to do a kind of qualitative research study for American Express, so looking after the US and Canadian market. So I said, sure. And that's kind of how I got my foot in the door into all things research within financial services. I did that for a few years, more on the full scale research side of things, but staying primarily with banks and professional service companies. So doing a lot of work with Amex, RBS, Citibank, some private equity firms. And then in 2012, I joined a small company called Mappa Research. Mappa had a very unique proposition where they maintained live access to bank accounts all around the world. So through friends and family and through people in the company, we would open up bank accounts and we would essentially audit what banks all over the world were doing from a digital banking perspective, digital transformation. So We would day in, day out look at the mobile banking apps, the tablet banking apps, the desktop banking platforms, track the changes, aggregate these all up, and then go to our clients, which were banks' digital teams, and tell them, what was happening amongst their competitors, what was happening amongst leading banks in the space. And this was back in 2012, 2013. So fintech
Oh.
was in its very infancy. So going the long-winded answer to your question was I was lucky enough to join kind of fintech and digital financial services in 2012, which was really when a lot of interesting and exciting change started to happen. So being really at the forefront of the industry and seeing how quickly change and innovation has happened and how it's benefited customers all over the world. It's helped people have better access to financial services, have cheaper access to financial services. It's helped people, access products and services that were once only available to, high net worth individuals or people
Mhm.
with a financial advisor or something. So that's where I get a lot of my inspiration, is seeing how quickly and how amazing the change and innovation has been in this space.
Yeah, and you've written quite a few articles recently on Forbes regarding some really interesting topics, including Chat GPT, which we'll get into a bit later. And I wanted to kind of switch to the customer experience side of it, and I'm glad you touched upon that a little bit. Because I heard at one conference, Peter Schenkman, who is the founder of Hero, he said that in order to provide a good customer experience today, you just have to be a little bit above the average, because the average is absolute crap.
Yeah.
Would you agree with this? And why is that? Like, is it because companies are chasing profits and not thinking about customer experience enough, or what is that?
Yeah, I mean, well, I can definitely, I'll speak primarily to customer experience within financial services, insurances, fintech. So the biggest challenge is that we're operating in a highly, highly regulated industry. So it's almost a good thing in a way that the customer experience is really shit sometimes, because you need to have that friction, right? Friction is a good thing when it comes to, having sustainable investments or, buy now, pay later lending. And I think this is kind of, I mean, when I look at Klarna and some of the buy now, pay later companies, they have an amazing customer experience. Like, I've used the Klarna app so many times in presentations and in research to show what like a really fantastic customer experience looks like. But then on the flip side, when you do make it so easy for customers to just take out a buy now, pay later product, is that good in the long term? I think this is a hotly debated topic in the industry. So I think when I think about customer experience in fintech and financial services, I think there's been a lot of improvements, which have of course been driven by the challenger banks and the fintechs. They have certainly upped the game and upped the expectations that customers have. And I mean, it can be something simple as, just a clean, intuitive UI within a fintech app or something. But it's interesting because I define a good customer experience as something that's like personalized, intelligent, predictive, relevant, or timely. And from my perspective, the secret sauce for a good customer experience, how to achieve all of that, is data. And the incumbent banks are sitting on so much customer data, I think more so than some of the fintechs and the challenger banks, where it may not be like the primary bank account or used in a way where you can get that really rich transaction data. So it's kind of this like ironic situation where the fintechs and the challenger banks kind of have the better customer experience, but the banks have the potential to make like a really amazing customer experience in financial services.
So can they utilize the data, and what do you think are some of the ways of utilizing the data? Because today we see a lot of incumbents actually changing their game and
Yeah.
forming partnerships and stepping out of this banking sphere, actually?
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to work with one of the leading banks in the Nordics. So I've spent quite a lot of time working with DNB in Norway, Norway's biggest bank, working actually on their data team. So working with the head of data commercialization and working under the chief data officer. So I've seen how challenging it is for a big bank to go through a data transformation. So the role of like a very forward-thinking chief data officer, a very innovative and I think forward-thinking kind of board and leadership level in the bank. Also the importance of data stewards and actually making sure that the data is the right data, it's cleaned, it's being used in the best and possible way by product and marketing. So it's not easy for an incumbent bank to all of a sudden start using the data in the right way. It is a transformation project. And I think also another critical component is having a modern next generation core banking system, because I think legacy cores are not meant for the easy extraction and use of data that is required by incumbent banks to use this in a customer centric way, in my experience. So there's a lot of like external large factors that will come into play, but I think there are a lot of banks which have this on their radar. They're taking the right steps for the data transformation, but also kind of the core transformation to make the data readily available.
I'm sure that the mention of changing the core banking system just made a lot of people from incumbent banks go like, don't mention that. But it is a necessary step. I agree. We've seen that also because my company, our primary role is to kind of service the needs of customer-facing departments with our software. And we've seen that a lot of the banks are not able to utilize the full potential of this software because we cannot connect, or like the CBS vendor won't open their APIs, or it's super expensive to open those APIs. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, it's a shame, but I think that, I've recently done a big piece of research looking at next generation core banking providers and digging into who actually offers a next gen core and who's just using the buzzwords, and looking into what banks are actually kind of going through these transformative journeys. And I think that in maybe 5-6 years, the majority of banks will have shifted in one way or another to a modern next gen core. So
yeah, I agree. I think that's has to happen. And I'm glad we touched upon the APIs a little bit, because right now here in Montenegro, we are just implementing the PSD2 regulation, and all of the banks have to comply with it by the end of the year. And I think the situation is the same in the region. Of course, we're in the early beginnings, but still that's like a prerequisite for our topic today, right? Open banking. So what is open banking? How would you define it?
So open banking, like there's two types of open banking. There's open banking uncapitalized, which is this broader concept of opening up APIs. And then you have like kind of the UK and broader European open banking, which is capitalized O, capitalized B, which is the regulation which primarily falls under PSD2. And also a lot of markets globally are starting to implement open banking regulation and also starting to draft different, papers and kind of indications of where they're going from a regulatory perspective. But I think at the broadest level, it's just opening up your APIs. So I think what's really interesting is banks in Southeast Asia, for example, have a totally different approach to open banking than European banks. So what we've seen is the leading banks in Southeast Asia have opened up their APIs and have monetized this. So if you go to like Standard Chartered, DBS, OCBC, you're always going to see an API marketplace, and some of the leading super apps and leading players in the government space and the retail space are already using banks' APIs to fuel their products and services. So this is one example of open banking. The second example comes when it's driven by the regulators. So when a bank has to open up specific APIs in the European instance, having to do with account information access and payment initiation. I'm sure we'll get into kind of the opportunities of open banking. But me as a consumer, I'm a huge fan of open banking. I think it opens up a lot of doors for new products and services. I think every time I've used it, it has made my life easier when the kind of the customer journey actually works, and when the data is standardized and it's used properly and everything. I'm a huge fan, and I think it's been an absolute fantastic catalyst for the space for innovation.
Which is a great intro to my next question, because in 2017 you had this keynote speech, and I don't think I was able to watch it. I don't think it's online, but it was titled "Who has already capitalized on open banking? Winning customer journey." Sorry, who has already capitalized on open banking, and what does it mean for the customers? So, can you summarize the points you made with that speech? Maybe it differs to the situation today, and how did the open banking look back then in 2017 when you started talking about it, when the regulators had just begun to actually just write these regulations and implement them?
So putting together this presentation in 2017, it was really hard to find examples. And doing this presentation, which I do quite a lot of workshops and keynotes around examples of open banking. It's really easy to do now. So back then, the examples were few and far between, and it was kind of a hodgepodge of different fintechs that were using open APIs to create a very kind of particular product or service or enhance an experience. There were a few examples of some banks using third-party APIs to create better like mortgage experiences or lending experiences, but there was no, it was very hard to find good examples, and there was only a few examples that had anything regarding account aggregation. So back then it was still screen scraping that was pretty much used for any account aggregation kind of nice PFM solution. I mean, the examples I showed were in the insurtech space, using third-party APIs to help like prove the identity of a customer. Like Tide was using the Company's House APIs to speed up the account onboarding process. And today we see open banking used by banks to prove customers' identity, to streamline the onboarding process. In the UK, we're seeing a lot of new fintechs using APIs to create better and new services around managing your taxes. There's like a dozen of open banking providers that are offering a better lending experience. So it's everywhere now. I think it's interesting because it's not something a fintech or a neobank can necessarily easily monetize. Like, I don't think people would pay a premium to have, account aggregation or payment initiation, but I think increasingly it is going to become a hygiene factor, that anyone that wants to kind of provide a good customer experience or new and kind of, good products or services, they'll have to consider open banking.
Yeah, and one of those examples, like I keep seeing in the McKinsey research that was published, I think last month or so, there was a mention of different banks doing different things with that, like a bank in Kazakhstan that embedded like a travel engine, basically, that searches for your flights, finds the best deals within their m-banking app. E-commerce has become also standard. Some banks are also using the B2B services, even like website creation, things like that.
Yeah.
So that's all, like it's like a world of possibilities, it seems like, right?
Yeah.
Um, what are the biggest advantages of embedded finance in this case, and from the perspective of customers, and why should banks invest more in building these ecosystems of partnerships and integrating with more and more third-party providers?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, embedded finance, it's very much a buzzword today. I've seen a lot of different numbers about how big this industry can become. But from my perspective, I think it's really important to differentiate between what embedded finance and bank as a service is. So I have a loose framework that isn't really like tried and tested, but I think if any brand or company wants to offer more than maybe like 40% banking products and services, they need to go down the BaaS route, not necessarily embedded finance.
Yeah.
Like, I think embedded finance is, I mean, it's not anything new because you look at airlines, right? So, for example, my credit card is a Lufthansa credit card. So that's an example of a brand, Lufthansa, embedding a financial service product, a credit card, via a partnership with DKB in Germany. So I think embedded finance is really only applicable to those non-financial service brands. Like, I don't think you can be a fintech and also offer embedded finance. It's one or the other.
Yeah.
I think embedded finance is very powerful because when you have a brand that has a very loyal customer base, like, for example, let's say like a sports club like Manchester United or Louis Vuitton or something, like where you have very loyal customers, by offering a credit card, a debit account, a loan, a savings account, I think this is where it can be potentially disruptive to banks. And I think banks have missed out on the whole kind of BaaS revolution. I think banks can be in a position to open up their APIs and make an embedded finance play. It's an additional revenue stream, I think, in a highly competitive space. Why not? If BBVA's done this. I know that SEB in Sweden have like kind of SEB X, I think it's called. I mean, why not use your APIs and fuel, better customer experiences in a more kind of open finance play and compete against the BaaS providers and the smaller embedded finance players?
But is BaaS problematic on the from the regulator's perspective? Because there was an example, right, in Germany, where was it Solgari or something, that they were
Solaris.
Solari, yeah, they were like denied that service that they wanted to offer.
Well, so Solaris can still offer. They're not banned from servicing their existing customers. When they want to onboard new partners, the regulator has to approve this. We've seen Railsbank as well in the UK, and they have a banking license in Lithuania. They have come under scrutiny from the regulator for lax AML practices. I don't think now is particularly a good time to be a BaaS. So this is again why I think it would be an interesting play for incumbent banks to start to play in this space. And for example, I recently saw Vodeno, which is a BaaS provider, has partnered with NatWest in the UK to kind of power NatWest's BaaS play. So there are examples of banks looking to do this. I think now, again, I think now would be an opportune time. And I think also, we do see some BASs that are starting to pivot towards calling themselves embedded finance providers. And instead of going after the fintechs, trying to, make a play in the mobility space and, with airlines, with retailers and everything.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I see. And when you mentioned that, like, I think with regulators, it must help, for example, in the UK, that the data that shows that over 7 million people are now using open banking, which is impressive, right? And was that possible, like, back then, like, when you first started talking about open banking? And I would like to invite audience to start asking questions. If you have them, you can write them down so we can address them later.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite an accomplishment. I think it's like 8% or so of the UK population. I mean, I think that there's a few challenges, I think, with getting like mass open banking adoption. I think first is because the incumbent banks in the UK have essentially been forced to do this. They've kind of dragged their heels. And if you look at the user experience for adding an account or adding your NatWest account into a Monzo, into your Monzo account, it's still a pretty shit experience. So there's a lot of friction there, which I don't think is good friction. And I think I wrote about this in the Forbes article, but for me, it's really important to get the incentives right. So open banking is scary for a customer because you are sharing your bank account data with a third party. I don't think customers realize how safe this actually is, kind of how it is read-only access. So I think in order for a customer to be able to share that data, there has to be a good incentive in place, right? So what are they getting in return? So I think it comes down to creating products and services that customers need and that they want. So the incentives are there. And I think it's also a case of providing the right education and copy and informing the customer that this is safe. Their data cannot be compromised. So I think incentives, education, they've been there in the UK. I think that has been definitely a reason why there are 7 million users, but I think it still can be done better to get more mass adoption.
Yeah, especially because of all these fears from, we've had controversies like with Facebook sharing data and all of that. So definitely education is needed. Now I want to talk about your latest article for Forbes, where you actually talked about the potential of ChatGPT to kind of revolutionize this space. It does seem a little bit utopian, right? But like, still, it's a good thing to discuss because I actually saw that an example someone shared on LinkedIn, I believe, that there was like there were some banks banning their employees from using ChatGPT or something like that, and then there were some people saying that ChatGPT is actually a really good thing, not for customer experience side, but more for internal use in the bank, especially with data, processing data, and helping with personalization of experiences by analyzing this data quickly, providing the next best offer, things like that.
Yeah. I mean, the article said I think there's a lot of potential for Chat GTP. I think the biggest impact is going to be, I mean, like you said, so for example, like there's no reason why financial advisors shouldn't be using an assistant to provide more personalized advice to their customers. So if we think about it, starting at kind of the high net worth private banking space, this would be amazing for any advisor. And I think this is where there's potential disruption, because then when you can provide that personalized advice, then you're allowing people to access a financial advisor, which is typically something that's confined to, higher net worth individuals or private banking. And I think like my dream scenario would be a solution where there's a Chat GTP-esque tool. I can safely share my account information and it can give me advice, right? It can tell me how to save money, how to budget better, that's like super personalized. It can no doubt be predictive. Like it has the potential to tick every box of what makes a good customer experience.
Yeah, I believe the SCB actually, when you mentioned them, that they were also building some system that they were going to integrate with their mobile banking app, where basically it analyzes your spending habits and basically says, okay, now you should pay all your bills, and then now you should save up, and it's like does it like every day or like on a daily basis. So
Yeah,
that's super
yeah,
convenient. Yeah, because you have like your own personal assistant sort of to help you
yeah,
manage your finance.
exactly. And I mean, I think with like I mean, GTP4 feels it feels a bit human, right? It feels like you're actually talking to someone. I was asking it something and I was like, well, you didn't consider this. And they were like, oh, I'm sorry, I overlooked that. And I was just like, oh my God, like I'm talking to an actual person. This is amazing. But I remember like a few years ago, I think it was either Deloitte or KPMG. I was at a conference or a presentation and they made this video of what the bank of the future looks like. And it was the day of this guy, he wakes up, he asks his like Alexa, how's my portfolio doing today? And it says, we recommend you rebalance and, sell this stock and buy this one. And oh, by the way, it's your sister's birthday. Do you want us to like buy her a gift or something? And it was just a two-way conversation between an Alexa and a guy, and she was just telling him everything to do with his finances for the day. And I was like, this is what Chat GPT can do. Has the potential.
Do you have any fears that someone was pointing out in one article that I wrote? My friend actually wrote the article, my Lithuanian friend, and he was saying, arguing that yeah, it's a good thing, but on the other hand, should we be asking questions whether it will make us dumb, sort of? So, or like not really dumb, but maybe lazy. Is that a thing maybe to worry about?
Every time I've used ChatGTP, it has saved me like hours where I've been able to then do something like more complex, right? So I've used a company I was working with before, big believer in OKRs, which I think is, I don't know, a bit crazy for like a super early startup. But I had ChatGTP write my OKRs, right? So instead of spending 90 minutes working on OKRs, I was able to like get back into thinking about what the new experience for an open banking integration could look
Right.
like.
So you
Uh,
wouldn't be stuck in processes.
yeah. I think it's great for giving. It can do like 20% of the mundane work. I think it can
Yeah.
give you the foundation for certain things, which I quite like. Like I would never fully rely on it for something. I mean, I tweak the OKRs a little bit, but it gave me that foundation. So I'm a big fan. It saves me time. So I don't think it's making me stupider. I hope not.
Right. And what do you think? Like certain bank employees should be worried about their jobs with the growing popularity and also functions that it provides? Because I did see, like, you probably also saw that meme, not meme, but like screenshot of the PayPal conversation with the guy where he says, "I got scammed," and the PayPal says, "That's great."
Yeah. I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I think like a lot of the fears about Chat GPT and kind of this whole revolution is it going to put everyone out of work? And this, I think, then will have this impact will be at a societal governmental level. So I don't think governments will necessarily let society become unemployed because of AI overnight. So I think there's definitely going to be some policy implications. It will have to be, yeah, well, it will have to be thought through. I think it will be thought through. But I don't know. I just can't see any bank like, sacking 10% of their staff and because it's not there yet, right? You still need
Yeah.
people to prompt it, and you still need to know exactly what you're looking for. So I think at this current iteration, I don't think it's possible. I think it just, I don't know, it, just use it for what it is. And
Yeah, I think the bank employees should use it the way that we use it actually, right? Like as you said, to reduce the time we spend on these mundane tasks.
yeah,
Like for example, for me, it was market research because like I would have to go on Google and find all the websites and contacts and everything, and ChatGPT can do that easily in like a matter of minutes.
yeah.
We have a question from the audience.
Mhm.
Thank you, Svetoslav, for asking this. The question is, what does the future of open banking and advancing technologies looks like? We talked about it a little bit now in this
Yeah.
discussion, but maybe you can point out anything you would say that you haven't said before,
Mm.
like something.
Yeah. So I think from my perspective, I think open banking has a lot of potential in the lending space.
Mhm.
I think specifically SME lending, like SME lending is very broken. It's very archaic. I think open banking can open up a lot of doors to provide loans to early stage businesses. I think open banking can I mean, this is assuming that the data a lender receives is like standardized and they can actually do something with it. So
Yeah.
let's talk about in kind of like this, like in a hypothetical utopian situation. Um, I think it has a lot of potential to completely revolutionize lending. I think if you then combine that with like quantum machine learning. I was working with a guy named Javier who's big in this space, and this is exactly what he's working on, right? Having, quantum machine learning combined with open banking to completely reimagine what lending can look like. So I think this is definitely one kind of advancing technology that can be combined with open banking. Again, I think if open banking can be combined with a chat GPT, this would be amazing. I think open banking, like, we'll start to see open banking use cases in being used by a lot of non-banking providers. So perhaps in the mobility space, in the rental space, property management space. So I think that's an interesting kind of play to watch in the future. Yeah, and I mean, I think we didn't touch upon cryptocurrencies or
Oh yeah.
digital assets or anything. This is a whole different topic. I am a fan of what DeFi can potentially bring, how it can disrupt traditional finance. I think the whole cryptocurrency space, it gets a bad rep, and I think there are aspects of it which warrant that bad reputation. I think you can say the same with traditional banks as well.
Yeah.
It's a huge space. I think there's potential, there's some bad actors, some bad players, but I think this is something to me that's quite promising and exciting as well.
Yeah, I mean, look what happened with the Silicon Valley Bank and also the Credit Suisse. So it's
Yeah,
not like it's not like that only blockchain is risky,
yeah,
right?
yeah. So I,
uh,
I hope that answered the audience. Yeah, I hope that answered the question in full.
yeah. Do we have any other questions? I don't see them. So I think, yeah, I think everyone's clear. You had a great you had great answers to my questions, I
Thank
guess.
you.
And I also asked the right questions,
That's
I
great
hope.
question. Takes two.
Thank you so much, Meaghan, for your time and for sharing your at least a little bit of your vast knowledge in the space with us today.
Yeah,
For anyone wanting to get in touch with Meaghan, I know she's very active on LinkedIn. She has her own website, and I'll distribute all of that in the follow-up email. So all of you who watch this webinar and all of you who will watch it on YouTube, you will have this material.
cool. Thank you so much for inviting me and letting me share my thoughts and experiences. And thank you to the audience for sticking around. And yeah, if there's any questions, I'm happy to jump on a call and talk about open banking or BaaS or anything.
Of course, and I'll see you in season 2 maybe, and
Yeah.
when we can talk about GTP 5 or 6 maybe.
Yes, definitely. And then maybe we can do this in Montenegro because I need to come back for
Live.
a visit. So exactly.
Yes, yes, live, of course. Thank you guys, and have a
Thanks,
great day.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.